Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce this very last panel in our today's session on legal education in Europe. And I think the three very stimulating interventions that we've heard already show that it has been an excellent idea to include this conference part in our ELPIS meeting, to exchange thereby on a regular basis on the best practices in the field of legal teaching, and also in trying to exchange some new concepts and possibly further develop them together, be it during the discussions, be it during the more informal meetings, the social aspect that has quite rightly been put forward already, and thereby finding some new ways of teaching, some new ways of coping with the challenges that we are all facing in legal education. The last two panels were dedicated to, on the one hand, a comparison between two legal systems, between two systems of legal teaching. We had, on the other hand, in the second panel, a methods-based approach with new input and new methods of teaching, new ideas in how to make experience memorable for our students. And now we are coming to, as Gerd has already pointed out, to the future of legal teaching methodology. And two aspects in this panel will probably be of significant interest, and that is, in the first place, it is the future. So new ideas, new paths that we might be able to take, might be willing to take, might have to take, and on the second and the second element being methodology. So questions of legal methodology, the development of legal methodology in our times, and the new ways, the new challenges that we are facing. So I'm really thrilled to moderate this panel, even if unfortunately it marks the end of our conference. But everything has come to an end, and there will be a new opportunity to meet again in next year or even earlier. We have the great pleasure to have with us online our dear friend and colleague, Professor Balaguer, who will who will talk to us first, and then we will have in present our dear friend and colleague, Fonseca, two eminent experts on legal methodology and modern legal methodology, two colleagues that have already presented us with their thoughts during earlier meetings, and that's why I'm particularly happy and particularly keen on knowing what they are going to tell us today, how their views have developed, how their ideas, how they will present us with new ideas on the future of law teaching methodology. With not much further ado, I would like now to give the floor to Paco Balaguer. It is a great pleasure to have you here, even if it had been an even greater pleasure to have you here in person, but obviously it's great to be able to meet online, and I hope that I'm not messing anything up concerning the technology, so I'm not tampering with it in any way, and just give you the floor Dear Paco, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Friedrich. I would like, first of all, to begin expressing my solidarity with our friends from Ukraine. I would like to be there, but this time it was impossible. Thank you for having me, not physically, but in online there. Thank you to Elpis and to Vasco Pereira. And most of the question that I have developed in relation with methodology in learning and teaching law are in a text that is published by Friedrich in a book about innovative teaching, and this is the result, if I remember good, from our meeting in Hanover. So I will focus in some of those topics, and if you want to know more about some specific technique and ways of teaching in the sense of the digitalization of teaching and law, you can find in that book, in my text and other texts included in the book. This is really hard speaking of the future now, because I can remember I was in a meeting in Spain 2 weeks ago, and somebody tried to explain the necessity of implementing reforms in law to cope the emergency situations like like health crisis. And I said, well, this is difficult because we have so much crisis in the last year that perhaps we need to think about implementing rules to norm the normality, because we have more time of crisis in 21st century than normality. If you remember, we began the century with a very hard crisis, a terrorist crisis in 2001, and then we have the financial crisis in 2008. We have democratic crisis with Cambridge Analytica and Facebook in the Brexit and presidential elections in North America in 2016. We have the health crisis in 2020. It was not only a health crisis, it was also a combined crisis with economic crisis and so on. And we have the worst of the crisis is the war in Ukraine. This is terrible, this is awful, and that could change the globalization and could change the face of our life in our world or future in the next coming years. So we have a very hard situation now for speaking of the future. But on the other hand, we need to learn of those experiences, and we need to learn and to incorporate those experiences in the field of law teaching. In that sense, the first reflection that I can deliver in relation with those crises is most of the crises, almost all of the crises, except the war in Ukraine, because the war in Ukraine is a crisis motivated by one state, by Russia, and this is more a crisis from the 20th century, from the Cold War, than a crisis from the 21st century. Most of the crises, almost all of the crises, are crises generated outside the state, are crises generated outside the state. And most of the crises or all of the crises have promoted weakness, growing weakness of law in the cultural life, in the society, in the public discussion, in the public debate, because law was impossible, the legal system was impossible to resolve those crises. If you think in the kind of crisis, the terrorist crisis was resolved by police and military measures. The financial crisis was resolved through economic measures. The democratic crisis was not resolved and had to be resolved by law, and it was not, because it was originated outside of the state, of the national state. And of course, the war in Ukraine is against all sense of law and justice. And that means that we have more and more the feeling that law is not capable, is not possible solve through law, or the big problems that we have in our century, the problems occasioned by globalization and occasioned outside of the borders of the state, the national state. That means that we have in our methodology, we have more a concession idea of legal teaching focus in the national state, in our national legal system. And we need to open our mentality. We need to open our studies to globalization, to economy, to all the problems that we have now in our world, because it's nonsense to explain the students only our national legal system in a world where globalization changed all the rules, and we need to explain also the impact of globalization in our legal system, and to explain our legal system through globalization, economy, technological developments, and so on. So, I mean, we need to change the content, the materials that we explain. That is also a requirement from the point of view of methodology. We need to focus our teaching more in the big problems our age, and not only in explaining the legal system of as if the legal system was isolated and not included in a process, the process of globalization and problems of coming from the globalization. So this is my first reflection, because if we think in our students, they are less and less motivated by law. They are motivated by economy, they are motivated by technology, they are motivated by other disciplines, but they are not so much motivated by law as before, as in the 20th century. So we need to change the content that we explain, and to show our students that we, through law, we can understand the problems of our age, and we can solve the problems of our age. I mean, we have the means through law to solve terrorist crisis, to solve economic crisis, to solve democratic crisis, and even to try to pacify, to incorporate peace in our world, and avoid the situation of war. So this is important for understanding the future of methodology in legal teaching. Another question had to be with the process of digitalization. I have analyzed that process in the sense of techniques that we can incorporate to legal teaching in the book coordinated by Friedrich. I mean, we know that there are more and more possibilities of adaptive learning, where you can, through the algorithm, establish a psychological profile from each student, and provide to each student differentiated teaching to improve the effectiveness and productivity of learning. That is possible, yet of course some risk in the sense of the fundamental rights of the students that we need to avoid, but it's possible to incorporate that kind of teaching in our system of legal system of teaching. But for me, it's also more interesting now the content. I mean, we have to incorporate the content that had a relation with the algorithm. We can speak we can speak even of a constitution of the algorithm, in the sense that we need to adapt constitutional law and legal system and legal law, and also our methodology of teaching law to a world, to a life that is today determined, built by algorithm. We have algorithm in the normative process, I mean, to produce rules. Even a Spanish author speaks about the algorithm and rules, because in some ways they are almost a complete regulation of materia. And then we have in the sources of law, we have algorithm in fundamental rights through the interdiction of discrimination, but in other things also we have algorithm in the judicial process. I mean, our juridical life is more and more built through algorithm, and then we need to incorporate content, technological content to our students. They need to know how to control the algorithm. How is the way of functioning the algorithm, the code that determine the algorithm process, and then we need to incorporate that content also in our methodology, in our studies. It is important also in an age we are centered in more integration in Europe, the health crisis through the building in the future of unitary health, European Union in the field of health is an important step to building Europe, and building Europe to give European Union the capacity of fight against epidemic crisis. And we are now in transformation also, in an accelerated transformation in the European Union to cope against the war in Ukraine and situations in the future that could be similar for Europe. And then we need more integration. I mean, it is important to understand, as Vasco Pereira indicated in this session, that we need more homogeneity. We need more harmonious education system in Europe to build Europe. Europe had to be built through the education, and an important role is education in law education, law teaching. So I think that HELPIS could make a great contribution to foster the harmonization of legal teaching in Europe, we need to incorporate more and more content of European Union studies to European education, and we need to adopt a European profile to law teaching in Europe. That is necessary to build Europe and to promote more integration in Europe. So in relation with the content, I think that we will need more and more disciplines that are not present or are not present in the measure that they had to be present in our studies. We need to incorporate more technological aspect in our teaching, economic, European, and so on, globalization, and so on. In relation with the techniques, I mean, it's clear that we will be in the future a more technological way of teaching. In Hanover, we have the possibility of seeing some kind of studies on methodological issues. Even we have some presentation about games, using games in the classroom. This is of course digitalization, but I like also the perspective that the flying classroom. I mean, this is interesting to understand that wherever will be the future in the sense of new techniques or methodological approach to teaching in law, it is necessary to understand that we need to incorporate more cultural approach in the sense of cultural in the sense of culture in general, but also in the sense of understanding juridical cultures in Europe and in the world, and we need more comparative law. I will say that the idea of the flying classroom is comparative law in action. This is really interesting, and we have in the future in some way a paradox. We use more and more online teaching, but we don't know the rules of online teaching. Online teaching had to be more adapted to the conditions of a virtual class. It is completely different to teach in a room, in a classroom, face to face, with the professor, the teacher that could motivate to the student in different ways, that give lessons through internet. We need different comprehension of online teaching. We need to understand that we had to motivate to the students through other activities and not only the traditional magistral lessons, masterclass, because we need motivated to the students and give the students the means to make autonomous work and in the way of activities, papers that had to be sent, the materials that they can check in the internet, and other activities that are common in online teaching. So for finish, because I have ended, because I have almost 15 minutes in my speech. I will say that we need to combine several methods, methodological approach, online, presential, face-to-face. We can incorporate algorithm and other techniques to our teaching work, but we don't have. We need to maintain always the idea that we are not only forming practitioner, legal professional, but we need to form jurist, and that means we need to incorporate always in our teaching the sense of justice. Peter Heberle, a German jurist, say that the purposes of legal science is in some way like the purposes of science in general, as defined by von Humboldt. This is the search, the permanent search of truth. But as the justice is the truth of law, legal science had need to be always searching justice, and we need to teach our students that knowing positive rules, knowing law, having a lot of data in the classroom is not so important as having a sense of justice. That at the end we need to teach our students. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, dear Paco, for this rich and stimulating talk, which addressed nothing less than the question which role the lawyer will have in the future, which tasks can be assigned to a lawyer, and which qualifications does a lawyer need in order to fulfill these tasks. And I think the point that we have to broaden our understanding of legal education and to take in several other aspects, be it digitalization, be it skills like, for example, negotiating skills in the field of international economic law. We were talking about that in the break, and but also questions of comparative law and culture. I think this shows that our task is a very demanding task, but that we are in our group well equipped to address it and to discuss it. And I thank you very much again for your intervention. As we are fortunate in this panel to have two panelists as originally planned, I would like now to give the floor to our friend Rui, who is here in presence and who is going to give the second intervention, the second talk on our panel. I have to see whether I have to readjust the camera again, because I don't know whether I've done that very skillfully, but together we will make it. That's fine? Yeah? All right.
Yes, I think so.
Well, the other one was a little bit more artsy.
Okay.
So this one is a little bit more Hui-centered. So it's,
Wonderful.
Terrific. Can I put the laptop here? Or?
right.
Okay, just to.
No, well, I think it should, nothing should happen.
Nothing should happen.
No.
I won't bang it anyway. So.
I
Okay.
think it would be much appreciated by the university, but also by Ingrid, who otherwise would have to explain.
Of course. So, good morning, everyone. I don't want to take you too long because this is the last intervention, and I was going to speak about information, reasoning, and culture. You might think this would not really have a place in a conversation about the future of law teaching, but I think that Paco Balaguer just demonstrated exactly otherwise. When I think of this, I always come to a memory that I have from a colleague of mine from the graduation times. This was, I believe, a course on commercial law, and we were solving this case involving a Monet. This was a very brilliant student, a very brilliant colleague of mine. He used the law, he solved the case, but at the end he had a small doubt. It's the only thing he did not know. What was a Monet? So he was able to solve the case from a legal point of view without knowing what was the object of the case. Of course, in an academic environment, this is possible. In the real world, probably it would be impossible, because if you have to negotiate the terms of a contract, of course, you need to know what you are talking about. But this is a point about culture. Just another small story that came to my mind when I was thinking about this. This one did not happen to me. This was told me by a colleague. She works in a big law firm in Portugal, in competition law. And one day she was discussing a matter with a trainee of hers. And at a certain point, she asks, I think it was her, well, have you looked at this from a bona fide point of view? And the trainee answered, well, that's not exactly my specialty. And this is so the first example stressed the point of culture, and this stresses another point, which has to do with ultra specialization that we face nowadays. I find that many of my master students are a bit surprised when I call their attention for the fact that the EU flag still has 12 stars and not more. And when they are confronted with this, well, they get puzzled. Really, I never noticed that. Of course, it's a piece of information which is completely irrelevant to solve a case, but not to understand the purpose, the reason to be of the European Union and its function. Now, these stories are more or less funny, but I was talking to Andreas just a couple of minutes ago, and it came to my mind another story, which is a little bit more dramatic. I have been in panels for selection of judges in Portugal. We have this system where the selection of judges is made by panels with judges and academics and lawyers. Judges are in minority in these panels, which is interesting. And the experience is that well, we have two ways. Of access: the academic access and the professional access. So the academic access has lots of exams and oral examinations. For the professional way to exceed, you must have a proper CV that justifies that you want to make an application to become a judge later in your life, because you have a solid career for that. Now, because we need more and more judges, criteria has been softening a little bit, and we see that people come to this phase not with a proper or solid CV, but for instance, just coming from public administration, wanting to become a judge. And what we can see in in these interviews is that legal information is there, namely when we are speaking about persons coming from the fiscal administration. So they know the rules that apply for certain situations. But once we present them with a problem that means dealing with principles, they are not able to do this. So this is a little bit more worrying than the first stories, and this is recurrent. This happens frequently, and this stresses the point of reasoning, because legal reasoning, I think, must be trained, and it depends not only on experiences like moot courting and debating, but also general academic environment. So when we look at law teaching and we know that we must select information to give students, and we must combine this with the training of legal reasoning, we have to make choices. We have to make choices. And from my point of view, it is more and more important to save time for training legal reasoning than to give them information. Because if we can actually contribute for a mental structure of reasoning, then information or more information can come later, and it already has boxes to be included in. If we miss the opportunity to train legal reasoning at the graduation level, then we will certainly have a problem later on. So I totally agree with Paco that we must provide culture in a broad sense. We must aim for theoretical purposes, comparative purposes, practical purposes, and technical purposes, which are not exactly the same. When I was preparing the bullet points to address you today, I actually came to the, well, not the conclusion, but the hypothesis that when we consider new technological means or new methods or new ways to teach law, the true enemies were there before and are there still. And I think that the true enemies are massification and ultra specialization, because that's what normally we are confronted with. So the problem, for instance, from my point of view with digitalization is not the use of digital methods, because we all know they are here to stay and they are useful. The problem is, how are we going to use these means in a way still to allow massive numbers of students to express themselves? Because if they cannot express themselves, they will not train legal reasoning. This means, of course, writing and speaking and discussing things with colleagues, with professors. So I think that from my point of view, the problem is, how are we going to use these instruments? I had the most interesting, this is a personal experience, not to do with teaching. In the last 2 years, actually, I was leading a team of experts for an international project, and for almost 2 years, we could not meet in person. It was just not possible. So we only met online, and we talked on the phone via WhatsApp or whatever. And it was actually possible for at least some of us to develop a relationship of, I can say, friendship. But I never met him in person. Well, this came to happen after 2 years. But the feeling was that, well, we knew each other already in a way. Okay, we only saw faces, but we saw smiles, we saw expressions, we talked. Because there was time for this. So we were not pressed by classroom clocks We were not pressed by, well, of course, pressed by schedules, but not academic schedules. So I think that it is possible to establish something close to a personal relationship with digital means. It's not the ideal, but it's possible. The problem is, how are we going to use these instruments in a way, again, to promote the expression of students, because they have to express themselves. So I think this is the problem for the future, not digitalization in itself, but the way we are going to use it and the way we are going to combine it with class-based teaching. Ideally, we will have some kind of combination between the two, but again, digitalization probably, at least for me, made me more aware of these needs and less of the need to convey massive loads of information. We are used to convey massive loads of information in classes, and we expect students to assimilate all of it. This does not happen normally. For some students, as Guerra pointed out yesterday, if we have some brilliant student, of course, this might happen, but not for the average student. So we cannot really expect that they absorb all the information that we give them. And digitalization, I think, that did put this on the spot, because it's more difficult to transmit loads of information with digital means. So in a way, digital means can make us more aware of the necessity to communicate and to reinvent our classes in a way that favors legal reasoning, in a way that favors culture, and of course alternatives like the one that Arndt just presented us today, a flying classroom, are I think of major importance, because if we don't take this kind of steps, of course personal fulfilling of students is very, very important, but we must not forget that we are pointing them to, I think, two major concerns, which is to go after justice and to go after peace. Being private law or public law, what we are really looking for is for ways for them to use the information that they will end up collecting during their lives in a way to promote, to actively promote justice and peace, being in a specific case or other general situations. Because, for those of us who have experience, some kind of experience in international law, for instance, we know, and we also spoke about this yesterday, it is perfectly clear that just giving them loads of information regarding the legal rules that apply and the conventions that there are will not help them to form an opinion on what is going on and on the way they can use that information to produce results related or pointing to justice and peace. So I think that the future must be in a way to come back to the purpose of law teaching, irrespective of the means that we use. Because again, I think that the real threats are massification and ultra specialization that legal communities normally demand from students once they they leave our hands. So this is what I wanted to kind of freely share with you today. Thank you for hearing me.
Well, thank you very much, Rui, for this thrilling and engaged intervention. And I entirely agree that the purpose of the law and the purpose of why we have the law must be at the center and must stay at the center of our legal education. You pointed out very clearly that there are dangers which might even be increased by digitalization of this problem of ultra specification, because ultra specialization, because if you are able to access tons of information on the internet, you might be tempted to wish to include everything in your work, even if it's not necessary, and even if you lose the purpose of your work. So I think it is perfectly true that basically the future of legal education must always have at its end a sort of control question: does that really serve the purpose? So in a way, future and past might not that be might be closer together than one might expect, talking about digitalization and modern issues. Well, thank you very much for this excellent intervention. The only problem is, the only question I've got